Her&EU, a European podcast on gender equality. Brought to you by the Martens Centre with Loredana Teodorescu.
Hello everybody and welcome to this new episode of Her&EU, a podcast on gender equality and women's role in the society. I'm Loredana Teodorescu and our special guest of today is Doru Frantescu, Strategic Communication Expert, Founder and CEO of EUmatrix. So Doru, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Looking forward to this.
Doru, listen, you daily deal with data. You've been also nominated by Politico Europe's among the top 40 most influential personalities in EU affairs for the work you are doing. You are providing stakeholders what they call the data-driven crystal ball to navigate systematic changes in the European Parliament. And now I would really like to benefit from your expertise with data to reflect on women's participation in politics. European elections are around the corner. This is an essential moment for European citizens to express their views on the European Union they want. We know that turnout in the European elections usually tends to be lower than the national ones, but we also know that there is a gap between men and women, which means that women are voting less than men. Do you have any data about that, and what are the expectations for this year?
Yes, indeed, the European elections are just around the corner. Indeed, there are some trends which can be found as quite interesting when it comes to gender behavior towards politics. Let's put it this way. And just as you said, indeed, the women participate somewhat less, meaning they show up to vote in the elections somewhat less than men, even though they say that elections are more important than the men do. Yeah, so they do consider them important, but for some reason, which still escapes us when it comes to actually showing up to vote, they do less so. Now, the differences, we have to understand, they are not dramatic. We're talking about 52% versus 49%. So it's just a matter of 2-3 percentages between the men and the women. So we don't need to overestimate this height, but indeed, we're dealing with a little gap there.
And now, for instance, let's look at female candidates at European elections, because there we know that women are still underrepresented in politics. And I think that elections are a perfect opportunity to have a say, yes, but also to take responsibility firsthand, which means also deciding to play an active role. Do you have any data on that? Because, in terms of numbers or party affiliations or countries, what's the situation there?
We do have projections of how the next parliament might look like. We're just very close to the elections now, and by now we have a pretty good understanding of what we can expect in the next parliament, who the MEPs are going to be and their characteristics, including the genders. And the way it looks at the moment, it may be, we're still in the margin of error, but it may be that for the first time since 1979, we're going to see a decrease in the amount of women members of the European Parliament. So now we have 40% of the members of the European Parliament who are women. And according to the current trend, we may see a decrease of maybe 1-2 percentage points after these elections. As I said, this would be the first time since we have the European elections. Now, we would try to understand why. The phenomenon is rather simple, in fact, and it has to do with the balance of power between the political groups.
Which is a sad news. On the one side, some countries have introduced different kinds, for instance, of quota system to encourage the participation of female candidates, which means that this is not enough because then it's not reflected in the outcome of the elections. On the other hand, it's really about numbers. From the first elected legislation in 1969, the percentage of female members in the European Parliament rose continuously after each election, reaching, as you said, almost 40% in the last legislation. So it would be really disappointing going backwards and actually decreasing the number of women after a legislation which saw women in very powerful position. Now let's look at what happens once women politicians are elected. What women politicians stand for. Again, you are assessing data, you are assessing the voting behavior of the MEPs, just to understand their own influence. So what can you tell us about women? Once they are elected, on which topics they tend to be more active, in which commissions they are more present, and how do you see their activism within the European Parliament?
Yes, there are two things that we're analyzing in particular. One is the direction in which various MEPs in categories and MEPs want to influence policies, and the other thing is in which topics or which parliamentary committees they are more interested in. When it comes to the latter, to who is interested in what, we do see some patterns there. We have seen women overrepresented, or compared to the average, so they were more represented in committees that deal, let's say generically, with more social issues or building the communities. And I'm talking about the Committee for International Development, which deals with supporting development in underdeveloped countries. I'm talking about the Employment and Social Affairs committees, also the Environmental Committee in the European Parliament, another committee that dealt with cancer, the Special Committee for Cancer was also seeing a quite big presence of women there. So that's where we have seen women to be more interested, to want to participate in the workings of these committees. On the other hand, they have been less present for, say, that the reasons can be different, whether they have been less interested or for the algorithm of division of the positions has been to their disadvantage. But the result is, however, that they have been less present proportionally in committees dealing with the budget of the European Union, and the money in general. The budget, the budgetary control, economic and monetary affairs, as well as constitutional affairs, foreign affairs, security and defense. So this is the list where the women have been proportionally less represented. On the other hand, when it comes to the voting behavior, and this is very interesting and important to mention, we are not seeing dramatic differences that can be attributable to gender when it comes to the policy preferences, or otherwise said, the direction in which the members of the European Parliament are voting or are shaping the legislation. The differences, or let's say the political group and the nationality, are much more important to shape the voting behavior of an MEP than the gender. The only topic in which we can see some differences in the policy preferences are those that deal specifically with matters that obviously are more sensitive to women than to men, such as abortion rights, which, and of course, they impact differently the two genders, and therefore the women, even in the conservative groups, they have let's say slightly different views. They are more supportive of rights than their male group colleagues. On other topics, however, as I said, the differences are quite small, and I think this is shaped by the fact that once you join a political group, then you join that group because you have certain views. So then you stick with those views throughout the political career.
Very interesting. So not much difference when it comes to political behavior, because it's driven by political affiliation and nationality. But still a huge difference. I understand a huge gap when it comes to topics. It's a pattern still existing. And overall, how would you assess the influence of women? Since you are assessing the influence of MEPs, of course, it depends a lot on specific women politicians. But do you assess their influence being a lower one because they are more engaged with social issues, or it doesn't make any difference?
No. I think, in fact, we've seen the women, even though they were numerically fewer in this parliament, I think that with that 40%, they have been almost as influential as the totality of the men. Because we did do the rankings, let's say top 100 most influential MEPs, and there I think the women were more than 40% present. Yeah, so they managed to be at the top more so than their numbers would have, let's say, statistically forecast them to be, and they were particularly influential beyond the social topics that I mentioned, also on others such as digital policy. And digital policy, I remember that I think the top 5 most influential MEPs at one point in time, towards the mid of the mandate, there were women, and the same for the health policy. So there were policies indeed where the women were quite active, quite influential. So the fact that they were fewer in the parliament, that didn't play to their disadvantage, and that also proves that it is the gender is not so much taken into account when allocating position of influence in the European Parliament. That shows that even with lower numbers, those women that want to be active and that want to be influential, that care very much about one issue, they have the opportunity to reach the top and shape the European views according to the European policies according to their views.
Of course. Probably this is not reflected on the Commission side. I mean, I think that there are fewer women leading the different commissions within the Parliament when it comes to powerful positions, let's say. But I don't know if you have data on this.
No, not immediately. Indeed, probably there are, of course, fewer women leading the committees as such. But as I said, in our overall influence index that we have for the 100 top most influential MEPs, they did better than the 40% that shows how present they are in the plenary of the Parliament. And also because I mentioned the Commission, I think in the Parliament we're doing better than we do in the Commission, the European Commission, because there, as I said, it's good. We have a president of the European Commission, which for the first time has been a woman. There is more staff, there is more female staff in the Commission as a whole than main staff. I think at the last measurement there were 55% women and about 45% men in the European Commission as a whole. But indeed, when it came to the positions of leadership in the European Commission, like senior positions like directors generals, then there's still a gap. Yeah? So while overall the proportion is quite different than in the European Parliament, so we're talking about 55% women again, that the position of leadership, there is still a gap there. Now, that gap is there also for historical reasons, because the promotions in the European Commissions take a very long time to have. You have to wait to be promoted. And at the beginning, a few decades ago, when the structure of the European Commission has been conceived and the first employment was done, there are many more men than women. So there are many more senior men than senior women, senior by age, I mean, in the European Commission, which explains this phenomenon. So there is progress there, but this progress takes organically a lot of time to be achieved. There are also some gaps by country. I'm still talking about the Commission, and interestingly enough, the countries that joined the European Union later, the countries from Central and Eastern Europe, are better represented. There are significantly more women than men among the staff of the European Commission, which can be counterintuitive. But it is explained by the fact that by the time these countries have joined the European Union, the situation in the society had changed substantially. So also the employment procedures had changed, which explains why we have many more men among the, let's say, the Dutch or the French staff of the European Commission, and many more women among the Romanians or the Baltics staff of the European Commission.
In the meantime, also the awareness was raised, and of course, as you said, the mentality and of the EU itself changed over the time. Now I would like to know more about your work. I asked you specifically to reflect on women's participation in the elections, their role at the political level, and I thank you really for sharing with us your knowledge. Usually we know that there is a lack of disaggregated data, and this is a challenge in itself for targeted measures, for instance, to really understand the situation and try to change it. So I'm wondering, do you usually deal with disaggregated data? Is, for instance, in your consultancies, are they often requested? Is there an interest in this regard? Or I was, let's say, the first one asking you to reflect on more specifically on women.
In fact,
you can be honest.
Data is not so much requested. It's only the media sometimes being interested in this, but not from the point of view of the stakeholders, let's say. By here I'm talking about both the public institutions or the private institutions, which don't look at, when they make analysis of the views and the influence of the members of the European Parliament, they don't look at gender. In the end, for them, realistically, it is not important whether the influential MEP in that committee is a man or a woman. What is important is their views, the way in which they want to shape policies. So we deal a lot with data, but we mainly look at the information from the perspective of the political groups, the nationalities, the professional background, the political background of the person, and their views. Because this is what it's the important for forecasting the direction in which certain leaders are likely to shape EU policies.
Of course. But still, I think that this kind of data could be useful for parties, for political groups, even for institutions, to understand better where there is a gap and where we should try to do more to develop then policies and overcome the obstacles which are clearly still there. Very last question. I'm really going to the personal level. I'm going to ask you something related to yourself. I really believe in mentoring, in people supporting each other. You initiated many projects. You initiated EUmatrix. I'm wondering if there was ever a person who inspired you throughout your life or supported somebody that you can call a mentor.
Well, that's easy because I'm very grateful for the support and the mentorship. Let's call it academic mentorship from the person that I founded my previous endeavor, that is Votac, Professor Simon Hicks, who back then was at the London School of Economics. Now he's in Flores, teaching in Flores, European governance. With which now we've been together in the Votac project for many years, more than a decade, and we still do very nice things together, like this MEP Euro MP match, which I take the opportunity to promote it because it's done in partnership by the EUmatrix with the European University Institute in Flores, and which allows the people to match their views against those of the members of the European Parliament. The way it works is that they vote on 20 votes that have actually taken place in the European Parliament, and at the end, the algorithm measures the views of the citizen with those of all of the MEPs and tells you which one matches you best. Now, there have been other similar tools. These are called voting advice applications. However, we modestly believe that ours is more accurate because it is not based on the promises or the agendas or the manifestos of the political parties. It is based on the actual voting records and decisions that were made in the European Parliament. So it is based not on words, it is based on facts. And we strongly encourage the people to use it. This is the third time we're doing it, myself and Simon. We did it first in 2014, then 2019, and here we are 10 years later doing the same exercise.
Good luck with that. I think it's a very interesting initiative. So thank you very much, Doru, again for your time and for your insights, and thank you to the Martin Center for making this podcast possible. Thank you all for listening, and stay tuned for the next episode.
That was today's episode of Her&EU. Subscribe to our podcast for more.